So it's kind of like having a software developer in your pocket. And I think that this has kind of been the major driving force of Claude's huge year. It basically allows people to have a technical co-founder that is always with them.
Hey, this is Inc. reporter Chloe Aiello, here to say thank you for watching and listening to The Business Model. As Inc.'s brand new flagship podcast, we want to give you more of what you like and keep our audience growing. So make sure you're following us wherever you're getting the show. And leave us a comment on YouTube. What do you like? What do you hate? What does this episode make you think about? Let us know so we can keep giving you the best business news and insights you need every week.
This podcast is brought to you by IHG Business Edge, where small and mid-sized businesses unlock exclusive savings at more than 6,600 IHG hotels and resorts worldwide. Visit businessedge.ihg.com to learn more.
Welcome to The Business Model. I'm Chloe Aiello.
And I'm Ben Sherry.
Today on Circling Back, we're talking about Inc.'s co-founder of the year, who isn't a person at all. Okay, Ben. You're our lead reporter on all things AI, and you just wrote a story about Anthropic's Claude, where you gave a very human title to the AI. So why is it that you decided to bestow the title of co-founder of the year on Claude? And what's a little refresher for folks who are listening on what Claude actually is?
Yeah, so Claude is Anthropic's AI model, or rather their family of AI models. They come in a bunch of different sizes. But Claude has been a major win for Anthropic this year, pretty much because it's been used in business. Unlike ChatGPT and, OpenAI, which has really focused on the consumer level market, individuals talking to ChatGPT, Claude has really gone after and really attacked the enterprise market and found a huge amount of success through there, specifically through coding. Anthropic focused very, very, very intensely on getting Claude extremely good at software development, software engineering. Basically, it opened up a new skill set for everybody. If you just have an idea for an app or a website, now you can basically create it by just typing in what you want and having Claude make it for you. So it's kind of like having a software developer in your pocket. And I think that this has kind of been the major driving force of Claude's huge year. It basically allows people to have a technical co-founder that is always with them. So it's a big deal.
That's obviously huge for entrepreneurs, especially speeding up the time to product development. I want to get into that a little bit more later, but I want to talk about Anthropic first. It's a very new company founded in 2021. It's had this meteoric rise. So what can you tell us about Anthropic?
These 7 were some of the most influential people to developing OpenAI's new models. So, ChatGPT came out in November of 2022, which was running on a model called GPT 3.5. Dario Amodei, who is Anthropic's CEO, was formerly the head of research at OpenAI, and he led development and research on GPT-2 and GPT-3. During that time, he became convinced of this something called scaling laws. And scaling laws are basically this correlation that's been found that when you train an AI model, if you give it more compute, right, the actual chips that we've been hearing about for all year with NVIDIA and with Google, these AI accelerator chips that were previously used for gaming consoles and gaming PCs are actually really, really good at running computations and creating these sort of the neurons that make up a neural net. So when you combine compute with additional data, right? Basically just swallowing the entire internet and processing it and using those chips to find the connections between everything. You get exponentially smarter, more capable AI. So that's the scaling laws. He saw this. He became convinced that pretty soon, once this gets out there, AI models would become way invested in. He basically predicted the future that we are in right now in about 2018, 2019. He and his, compatriots, these 6 others, including his sister Daniela, started to worry that the leadership of OpenAI couldn't be trusted to responsibly scale that technology, right? And I think that, they won't actually say who they're talking about, but come on, we know that they're talking about Sam Altman. I guess that there is this worry that they will be too beholden to business interests or to, maximizing shareholder revenue to do what's right for the world when it comes to responsibly introducing this technology. So they left in December of 2020, kind of collected a few more OpenAI people along the way. And in May of 2021, they announced Anthropic. A couple years later, in 2023, they released Claude, the first version of the model, which was, not really that successful or anything. At that point, it was basically like, oh, there's another AI lab. We didn't really know much about AI at that point. We pretty much only knew OpenAI and ChatGPT. Other entrants hadn't really, entered the field yet. I would say that their big kind of coming out party for Claude was the model Claude 3.5 Sonnet. That's sort of their medium-sized model. The way that Claude models work are that they're kind of like designated by kinds of poetry. So you have Claude Haiku, which is like your small, fast, cheap version. You have Claude Sonnet, which is your like medium-sized, medium-cost, medium-speed one. And you have Claude Opus, which is, as you can imagine, the big one, the expensive one, the one that takes a bit longer. But Claude Sonnet 3.5, which was released summer of 2024, was a major leap forward for AI-powered coding. So suddenly, people could, as we were just saying, type into the Claude chatbot and just say, hey, Claude, make me a, closet organizer in the style of the movie Clueless. And, it would do its best job. It's not always going to like do an incredible job, and it definitely takes some work, but it could make stuff. And, it's a powerful feeling. I don't know about you, but I know literally nothing about programming and coding and software engineering.
No, I'm the same.
Never took a class. Always was told growing up that, oh, this is probably going to be a big thing. You like video games, you should get into this. Didn't have the brain for it. But I always had ideas. I think we're writers, right? We have ideas. And so it's amazing to be able to just write your ideas down and see them kind of come to life before you.
So what you're describing is more commonly called vibe coding. But in your story, you mentioned that Amode doesn't actually like that term.
No.
Can you tell us what he had to say about that?
Yes, I did interview Dario for this story. And one of the things I did have to ask him about was, what do you think of the term vibe coding? And he basically said that he thinks it's a bit woo-woo. And I wasn't surprised by that. He is a scientist. But yeah, I think that he accepts the term because it's accurate. And actually, the term was only created in February of this year by one of the former founders of OpenAI, this guy Andrej Karpathy, who is a like major celebrity in the AI world. And he basically just said like, oh, I've been doing this thing with Claude where I talk to my computer. He basically said like, oh, I have a transcription service on my computer that I can just press a key and talk to and tell it in my natural voice what I want it to do. And so like you basically just follow the vibes, where you're not so worried about the construction of the thing. It's more about playing with the model.
It speaks to the speed at which this technology is using that happened in February. And as of December, it's become an essential part of our vocabulary today. So that's really wild.
I don't know the last time that I went a day without saying the words vibe coding.
Let's get back to your story. So what sorts of companies have been totally transformed by Claude through, what you've been describing?
Well, I mean, as we were just talking about, it's basically these vibe coding companies. So Claude can do some vibe coding on its own. Like if you just go to Claude.ai, which is their consumer forward, platform, and, Claude isn't really aimed exactly at consumers, but they do have a consumer platform. And if you go on there and just start typing, it'll create a little, thing for you, but you can only go so far with it. It's kind of meant, and they've told me this, it's more meant to be a place for you to experiment with stuff, to prototype stuff. If you want to go further with it, Anthropic has their own tool called Claude Code that basically plugs into your computer's terminal. And you just type Claude into your terminal and it activates, you can start writing. The terminal is kind of intimidating. It definitely was for me at first. And because of that, there are all of these other companies that have kind of popped up to make more sort of consistent, user-friendly versions of vibe coding, but they're all powered by Claude. So one of them is Lovable. That's kind of like one of the big European success stories in AI. Obviously, Europe has had a lot of, AI regulation. It's been difficult for a lot of companies to kind of get their foot in the door. But Lovable was started by this guy, Anton Osaka, who started by just making kind of like a fine-tuned version of ChatGPT, or using a GPT model, rather, that could do some coding. When Claude came out, Claude 3.5, like we were just talking about, he switched over to that, saw major changes, and decided, like, okay, this is a platform, actually. So he created this thing, Lovable, which is a web-based platform for vibe coding, where you don't even actually see the code if you don't want to. It's all entirely based on the web. It's very, very fast. When I interviewed him, he talked about a vibe coding loop that's sort of similar to what a lot of engineers talk about when they're coding, where, they kind of get into the zone, where suddenly it feels like, hours are passing in minutes, and we've all felt that way, right? And I think, like, if
Sounds like flow state.
It's a flow state. It's like, it's Neo at the end of the Matrix, kind of like seeing through the code. Mm-hmm. And I think that Anton, the CEO of Lovable, is convinced that by getting people into a vibe coding state where, or a vibe code flow, mm-hmm. they'll be more encouraged to kind of stay on the platform, because it's not just that they're building something that they want to use or to sell, but it's kind of fun to actually do the act of building it. Another one that's been, a really big success is this company StackBlitz. So Eric Simons and Albert Pai founded StackBlitz. It's this company that was created to basically make web containers for code. And so basically to create a coding platform that professional engineers could use to develop software on the web, on mobile, kind of wherever they are. Usually this is done on your desktop in an actual app called like an IDE, an integrated development environment, or in the actual terminal itself. But they wanted to do an online thing. Eventually, it didn't really work. They were struggling to get people, software engineers, to embrace sort of a web-based platform, and they were getting ready to shut down in 2024. But then they decided to do one last pivot and basically create a ChatGPT-like platform, but for coding. They tried using a ChatGPT-owned AI model, but that didn't end up working. So they went to Claude, and they got some face time and some quality time with Anthropic's Applied AI team, which is basically their team that goes out and consults and helps clients to make sure they're getting the most out of the AI models that they possibly can. So that involves, prompt engineering, that involves fine-tuning. It can involve a lot of like very intimate stuff. And this is one of the first companies that Anthropic worked very, very closely with to help them kind of perfect their platform. And that platform ended up being called Bolt.new. That came out a little over a year ago and became a giant hit pretty much instantaneously, saved the company. Now they're doing incredibly well. And yeah, just completely transformed the trajectory of this company and many other companies that are providing these vibe coding platforms. Others include Cursor, which is more for your, sort of high level, already a professional developer that wants to use code. That's another thing we haven't actually talked about, is that it's not just non-coders that are vibe coding, although non-coders probably wouldn't call it vibe coding. Or coders themselves probably wouldn't call it vibe coding. It's also professional software developers who can go a lot further than vibe coders can with talking to it, because they actually know the terminology of what they're talking about.
That makes sense.
So it makes it a little bit easier for them to say stuff. It's been a major sort of transition period for, the world of software development. I think that if you look at a lot of surveys, I would say the majority of professional software developers are now using AI pretty much daily in their workflows. I've talked to people at Anthropic and OpenAI about how internally these tools have really sped up their ability to ship and get products from prototype to out the door in, weeks or even days as opposed to months. So it's a big change. It's not nothing. It's pretty crazy, and it's fun too.
Yeah, interesting too, because Anthropic, as you hinted at earlier, has sort of positioned itself as the kinder, gentler AI, the more benevolent AI.
Yes.
So that really tracks. Also want to point out, too, that Lovable is one of those companies that achieved $100 million annual recurring revenue in record time. I think it was about 8 months. So obviously, something about this is clearly working. We talked about OpenAI. Claude, obviously, and ChatGPT, big competitors. They're often mentioned in the same breath. I think you were hinting earlier that ChatGPT, OpenAI's ChatGPT, is one of these more general use models, or that's the reputation it's earned, whereas Claude has earned a reputation for being, business ready. I'm wondering if you could dig into some of the differences between these two when it comes to their capabilities and their pricing. What makes Claude different?
Yeah. So as you just said, Claude is really attacking the enterprise market. And the way that AI companies kind of bring their models to the enterprise, they're kind of two ways, right? There's the enterprise package version, which is essentially just a tool that allows you to talk to Claude, give it your company's internal information so that you can make chatbots that tell you about benefits and stuff like that. OpenAI also has something like that. Those have been like a fair success, but the real money for Claude has come through the API. That's basically, you can think of it as, the wires that allow you to connect your data and, your company's applications to Claude. The API pricing for OpenAI and for Claude is quite different. Yeah, so GPT 5.1, which is, OpenAI's current flagship model, it costs $1.25 for 1 million input tokens. That's basically, the units of data that are fed into the model when you give it a prompt. And then $10 per 1 million output tokens, which are, the text that it generates or the images that it generates, whatever it kind of spits out for you. Claude Sonnet 4.5, their flagship mid-sized model right now, costs $3 for every million input tokens and $15 for every million output tokens. So that's a big difference in price. But I think that, like we were just saying, I think that people are willing to pay a premium for Claude, or at least businesses are, because of that safety-minded focus, because it feels more like playing. It has this just more collaborative energy to it that I think allows them to kind of go further than they previously could.
Yeah, and it sounds like Anthropic is kind of betting on people willing to pay a premium for, top-tier AI, at least heading on into the future too.
Yeah, but actually, they're in some ways they're also doing some unexpected stuff. When I was reporting this story, and this is just to show you how fast stuff changes in the AI world, people told me, the price of frontier intelligence will never come down. It's always going to be like consistent at this like high level, because Claude Opus, their 4.1 version, was very, very expensive, like $75 per 1 million output tokens, which is a lot. I mean, it's like crazy much compared. But with their new flagship model, Opus 4.5, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, they actually slashed the input and output pricing down. So it's only $5 per million input tokens and $25 per million output tokens, which is way more competitive. And people are really, really happy with that model in terms of vibe coding. Like, I've heard several people say it's like the best vibe coding model ever, just coming out a week or so after Google's Gemini 3, which previously took the vibe coding crown. So it's like this stuff is changing constantly. And if you're like plugged in online on like, Twitter and whatever, which I'm trying not to be, but like for work.
How can you not?
We have to be, right? But it's like you have all this whole hype cycle where it's so over, we're so back. It's constantly changing where, Anthropic is cooked, OpenAI is cooked, they're goated, they've got the mandate of heaven. Like it never ends. So it's a rat race, and I don't really see it ending anytime soon. These companies are going to keep trying to one-up each other.
I guess I'm wondering now. I'm glad you brought up Gemini 3 because, to your point, it's a race. These models are neck and neck. We've got Google, there's OpenAI, we have Anthropic. They're all sort of competing in various different competencies, leapfrogging each other.
Yeah.
So what's it really going to take to win the race, to be the top model, the top company in the space?
America's next top model?
Yes.
The world's next top model?
Yep.
Well, you gotta be fierce, for one.
Always fierce.
Sashay away. Wait, no, that's RuPaul. I think that it's gonna take vibes. I mean, I know that I keep saying this, but I think that eventually the models are all going to be just really good at coding. And the actual capability isn't really going to be the problem. It's going to be more about taste. The benchmarks that kind of judge how good these AI models are at coding, one thing they can't do is account for taste, right? They just do function. So they can make a functioning website that's the ugliest thing you've ever seen, and they'll give it like a 10 out of 10. But I think that that's not going to be, sustainable in the long run. People want something that has like a level of taste, and that is collaborative and useful to work with. So I think that, and also I think that this is just the first revenue generating business case for AI. I think that, when ChatGPT came out in 2022, we were all like, okay, this is really neat, but like, what's the business? What's the business model? And I think that part of the reason why Anthropic went so hard into the, enterprise as well is that it's a more consistent source of revenue, right? You don't have the churn levels that you do with consumer.
It sounds like what you're saying is it all is kind of circling back to that conversation you had with Amanda Askell, personality, the vibes, the different sort of, persona that Anthropic brings to Claude.
Yeah.
It's a matter of taste. And I think that's a great place to end it today, Ben. So thank you so much for circling back with me.
Thank you for having me.
Ben and I will be right back to share our biggest news obsessions this week for Closing the Loop.
Simplify business travel with IHG Business Edge. Enjoy guaranteed discounts, flexible booking, and automatic IHG One Rewards Silver Elite status after your first stay. With access to 20 IHG hotels and resort brands worldwide, discover how effortless and rewarding business travel can be. Visit businessedge.ihg.com to learn more.
All right, we're back, and it's time for Closing the Loop. Ben and I have both brought a story or topic that we're obsessed with. So, Ben, let's start with you.
All right, so the story that I brought is actually two stories from the New York Times and from Bloomberg. They're both about the new Meta superintelligence team that has been, kind of the subject of Mark Zuckerberg's attention for the last few months. I think in June, he hired Alexander Wang, the former head of Scale AI, the data labeling company that our coworker Sam Blum has done a lot of reporting on. This guy, Alex, has been put in charge of creating basically the Avengers of the, AI world to create what essentially in this article at least is called a machine god. But the problem is that a lot of Mark Zuckerberg's most loyal lieutenants, the people that run the social media feeds of Facebook and Instagram and, what have you, are kind of chafing up against all of these new extremely highly paid people who are demanding more compute, more resources, more everything. And Mark Zuckerberg is basically listening to them. In the articles, they talk about how Mark has basically surrounded himself like physically in his office with all of these super intelligence people so that he could have more insight into what they're doing. And I think it's kind of rubbing a lot of the former longtime Meta employees and, Zuckerberg loyalists the wrong way. So it's an interesting sort of story where, Zuckerberg is spending all of this money and resources to try to build this crazy machine god, but a lot of the people that actually run the day-to-day business of Facebook and the things that actually make money are feeling a little left out.
I can understand why that would be. We've talked about in the past these crazy high job listings with these crazy dollar amounts attached that, Meta's using to attract this top tier AI talent. So I can see why his maybe previous leaders would be having their feathers a little bit ruffled here. I guess I wonder who's winning this sort of, battle of the wills here, because I know you kind of mentioned, and as the story says, there's these folks at Meta who want to use the AI for the social media, whereas, as you said before, this new batch of leaders wants to use it just for the sake of AI. But I'm not by any means an intensive Meta product user, but I do use Instagram, and I do see that there's AI embedded into the feed now. So I'm wondering, who's winning out in this struggle, or if it's too soon to say.
I mean, at this point, it kind of seems like the superintelligence team is winning out. And also, I think if you look at what Meta has really done with AI at this point, it's pretty disappointing, right? Like what you've seen on Meta is probably, chat with an AI, right? And stuff like that, where it's like, who wants to do that? Or at least personally, I'm not really that interested in it. Or, it's like make an AI sticker that you can send to somebody. And I think that there's a lot of cringiness involved with that. I think that if you look at where all of the compute is going, where all the resources are going, it does seem like the superintelligence team is starting to get it. In fact, actually, earlier this week in a different article, there was a lot of reporting going around that about $2 billion are being taken from the Metaverse project. Obviously the huge Mark Zuckerberg passion project that started in 2021. It feels like a million years ago, but it was only 4 years ago. That has been a giant failure, I think it's fair to say. First they didn't have legs, then they didn't really have anything. And yeah, the virtual reality metaverse unit apparently is losing resources that are going toward the AI and wearables unit. So, one of Meta's biggest products over the last few years has been these smart glasses that they have. Those have been a big hit, where the metaverse has not. And I think you're seeing Zuck maybe start to realize, okay, I need to actually start shifting resources, and that might rankle a few feathers. Is rankle a few feathers like mixing two metaphors?
Possibly.
I think it might be.
Hard to say.
But yeah, it's an interesting moment for the company, right? They renamed themselves from Facebook to Meta, and I think there's arguably probably more than just going to the metaverse. They may have wanted to distance themselves from the Facebook brand a little bit. One of the unique things about Meta's AI strategy is that they've been really committed to open sourcing their models, which means that you don't really need to pay for them in order to use them. You just need to pay, you download them and then you run them. So you pay, the power that it takes to run them, but you don't actually pay fees to Facebook. That's going to be changing apparently in the near future. They're working on a closed model now, which could put them more in the race that, like we were just talking about with Claude, is sort of what Anthropic is doing right now.
Yeah, interesting to see how these different companies are handling AI. And worth noting, too, that the New York Times coverage sort of mentioned that these big hires were all prompted by Meta's models sort of underperforming the competition. Anyway, let's pivot to my story that I want to talk about, which is, of course, Australia's social media ban for teens under the age of 16. First country in the world to do this. Super interesting. It took effect December 10th. It affects all kids under 16, as I said, which is millions. And pretty much every social media platform, the ones I saw on the list are pretty much the big names. So we're talking about Instagram, as a result, Threads, because those are Meta products. We're talking about Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube. And then the government said that they'll be watching to see if kids migrate to other platforms. And if they do, that those platforms will join the list. Authorities are trying to make it so that there's really no way around this. And these kids, or these platforms rather, if they don't comply or make a good faith effort to comply, they risk $50 million fines. So the government's serious about this, but it sounds like early feedback has been mixed. Some parents are so grateful because obviously we've heard the negative consequences of social media when it comes to sleep disruptions, addictive tendencies, depression-like symptoms among teens, among other things. So some parents are thinking that this is the best thing ever. Other parents are actually helping their kids skirt the age verification guidelines, which is a little bit wild to me. But of course, we've seen kids using things like VPNs and other, help from their parents to get around this.
Yeah.
Some parents have said that because some teens are skirting the age verification, then the teens who are not able to do that are feeling left out. And I also want to mention that this is coming as there was a separate Pew survey that came out about American teens that says that about a third of teens use one of the major 5 networks, which is YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and I think Facebook was the other one, almost constantly. This comes as we're getting research that shows that teens are not putting down these platforms, which is also kind of reinforcing the point, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, and they're addictive, right? And it's been shown over and over again. The term brain rot kind of had a coming out party this year, or maybe it was last year. But this idea that social media is really kind of infecting the minds of young people, especially if you get it in front of people like at an early enough age, it can really do some damage to you. And I think that when we were growing up, right, we probably both kind of came up around getting a Facebook account in like high school or middle school or something like that, right? And so now you have much younger kids than that getting into this stuff, and it's interesting to think about like sort of what I mean. Neither of us are parents, but it's not easy.
Except to a cat.
Yeah. We are both cat parents.
The last thing I'll say is that the Pew survey also looked at AI chatbots, and it found that 64% of teens said that they had used one ever. 28% said they use one daily, and 16% said they use chatbots several times a day or almost constantly. So that's even beyond the social media platforms that we're more familiar with. This is a new area of emerging interest and research. And obviously we've seen negative consequences out of that already. But bringing it back to Australia, I think it'll be interesting to see if any countries kind of follow suit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a, very fascinating kind of pilot program for the world. And I think everybody's going to be interested to see, how these kids turn out. Hopefully a bit better.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Ben, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me here and letting me talk on and on about Claude. You only hear about it all the time in the office anyway.
That's true, in our pod. The Business Model is an Inc. podcast. You can find episodes every Monday and Friday on our YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe and check out some of our other videos. You can hear the audio version on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back in your feed on Friday. See you then.